I think I have to take this. I think we're going to have to take this class downstairs because I think we're going to continually get cut off. And it's just mine is starting and stopping. I don't know. Maybe I'll just move this a little bit, maybe closer to the router. Just give it a test, perhaps. But if I just got kicked off. If we keep getting kicked off, then I think I'm going to have to stop the broadcast and then continue it. So now you have this. Let's see if we can get rid of that bright background. So now we're speaking about the male-female issue, but what I was saying is that those tensions, I think they come out quite drastically in this discussion. Because obviously male and female roles are much different now than they are when Krishna spoke Bhagavad Gita, when Srimad Bhagavatam, when the pastimes in Srimad Bhagavatam. The pastimes that Srimad Bhagavatam describes were enacted. And at the same time, modern society and social values are much different, even a little bit different than when Prabhupada first came, and obviously much different than the way Prabhupada was raised. So then this tension is, well, what's better? You know, are there good things in our modern culture, and are there things which would be detrimental in our traditional culture? Are there good things in the traditional culture that some of us may not want to inculcate? Are there bad things in the modern culture that we're bringing in? So you have this approach in so many discussions we have. And if you're arguing the traditional approach, then you have a lot of resources, because that's the approach Prabhupada gives. If you're arguing the modern approach, you have resource, but it's not as practical, because Prabhupada will say, this is the role of women in this example. In Vedic culture, women were like this is the role of wife, this position of man, and so forth. And I think, the main, not the only, but the main resource you have in Prabhupada's words for a more modern approach is just the idea that we have to be adaptive in order to spread Krishna consciousness. Now, that's very subjective, because if I use that quote to say, well, I can adjust it as needed, because Prabhupada said we need to adjust it, and the basis of my adjustment is what's acceptable to people, then naturally the argument will be, well, what's acceptable to people is intoxication, illicit sex, and so on, so you can't adapt to that. So then the question becomes, how far do you adapt? And what is really, if you have to adapt, what's necessary, and what is beyond necessary, which that becomes a compromise. Did that make sense? Yes, no, maybe. I can hear you, but I can't see you. Wow. What about now? Well, I'm not looking that beautiful today, Alana, so you're not missing much. Hare Krishna. What about now? You can see me now? See, Talila can't see. Well, maybe that's because I was changing channels. So, what's the traditional role of woman? Traditional role of woman. Even that can be controversial, because what tradition are you talking about? What history of India are you talking about? What part of India are you talking about? Okay, then someone might say, well, that's not really the question. The question is just general Vedic tradition. Okay, so then we have to agree on some traditional roles. Wow, you don't see. It's amazing. And I don't know why. And I don't even know. I mean, I can see myself. But I see. Oh, Christina sees. So maybe those of you who came earlier can't see for some reason. Because we got off and we went back on. In any case, we're talking about, right now we're talking about the polarity between traditional values and modern values in their application in ISKCON, and what is healthy and what is unhealthy. And we want to apply that to the role of women, and particularly in relation to men. So I think it's safe to say that in all traditional societies, there are a few things you could notice that are absent in modern society. One is the separation, to one degree or another, between men and women, which is still exists in our society to some degree, but not to the extent that it existed previously. We still have male and female bathrooms, and you might think, well, of course. Well, I heard that in some colleges they're trying to, or they already have, gotten rid of those. They don't want to discriminate. But anyway, don't take it for granted that there'll always be male and female bathrooms. They might, at some point in society, want to break down the gender roles to such an extent that the mingling of men and women is so common that you won't even have separate anything, including bathrooms. So traditionally, separation of men and women, that's very common. Now, according to the culture and the time period, these separations may have been greater. We hear that even at the time of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta, that when they would do programs, women would sit in a separate place. And if the women were in the same room as the men, they would sit behind a curtain so the men wouldn't have to see them. Now, our sensibilities think that's almost kind of torture, or at least it's very demeaning to the women and unnecessary. And what's wrong with the men? Do they lack so much self-control that they would just melt by seeing an audience of women, even when they're speaking about Krishna? So that would be kind of our modern sentiment and response. And we have to understand that that's how modern people would think, because that kind of separation has been uncommon for a long time, at least in Western countries. But if you go back to more traditional societies, and even modern Muslim society, you'll see that. The women covering their bodies from the neck up all the way down to their feet and practically their hands. That was traditional. Even in America 100 years ago, that was standard dress. The way women would dress at a beach, for example, when they bathe in the water, sacred rivers, or go swimming in India, women bathe in their saris or Punjabis. They don't show themselves. That's because they consider it unchaste to expose their body to anyone other than another man. And so if you go back in history, you'll see that was also common, even in Western cultures. And as they become more liberal and more sexual, then women's dress changes. So women expose their bodies more. There's more graphic content in movies. I was just in, where was I? I was in an airport in Italy. So I was walking by Victoria's Secret. And Victoria's Secret has videos playing of Victoria's Secret's fashion shows. And Victoria's Secret is an a store that sells women's lingerie, underwear. And so you can understand, if you're having a fashion show, then women are wearing lingerie in public. And I came to understand, I kind of understood it, but a lot of this underwear is intended to excite men. It's not just for wearing under their clothes, but it's when they take their clothes off. So they're showing all these, what I would say, erotically stimulating bras and underwear, and being worn in public on a stage at a fashion show. And I was, not that I wanted to look at it, but I was caught by it because I was just walking, and I was kind of appalled by it. And I was thinking, if we saw this when I was a kid, then we would call this pornography, and it wouldn't have been allowed. But now, our society is such that it just becomes commonplace to see half-naked women in videos and photographs all over Victoria's Secret store. If you've seen Victoria's Secret, then you know what I'm talking about. But it's basically pornography. So it shows that society has gone from these traditional roles of men and women being separated and women covering their bodies to it being acceptable for men and women to mingle very closely and dress in a way which we would call, for lack of a better word, a Hare Krishna word would be unchaste. In other words, a woman's exposing parts of her body that traditionally were always covered, which basically means all of it. So if you're comparing it to traditional society, if you expose anything more than your fingernails, basically, you're being exposed. So now, obviously, when Prabhupada came, he didn't tell the women to wear dresses from their neck to their toes, but he did like it when they wore saris. He said they look very beautiful. And saris obviously cover the body, or they're supposed to. Of course, modern use of saris may be different, where they show parts of the body. But that was not the original intention, as far as I understand. So anyway, these are traditional values. There was always some degree, depending on culture, of separation from men and women, and generally a lot more separation of men and women in traditional cultures than there is today, and so much of it that we would think it's unreasonable, unfair, fanatical, demeaning to women, unkind, and so forth. So now we want to bring that into a modern context of male-female association, because in our society we have some restriction between male and female. Now, Prabhupada has given the example that a man is like butter and a woman is like fire. And when butter is put in the fire, the butter melts. And the melting analogy means he loses his sobriety, he becomes physically, sexually attracted to a woman, he can lose his intelligence, he could even do something bad, like leave his wife, or in worst case scenarios even rape a woman, or just lose control. And even sometimes men lose control on dates. What do they call it? Date rape or something? Yeah. So one of the things that I find, that I don't know how to say this, because I'm saying this from a male perspective, but women like to dress to make themselves beautiful. And as you know, a lot of times you're dressing yourself beautifully because other women are dressing themselves beautifully. And men don't understand this, that you as women like to look at yourself. You like to have a beautiful self-image. It makes you feel good. And it's important to look good for other women. Because if other women are dressed nicely and you're not, then you feel kind of left out in a sense. Or it's just your self-pride that you want to look well. It's natural to want to look well. Or you might be very artistic and dressing is almost like an art for you. And there's nothing wrong with that. And the problem that men will have with that is that modern dressing doesn't often make women look beautiful. It makes them look sexy. And there's a difference. So when a woman looks beautiful, her beauty doesn't sexually attract men. It causes men more to feel sober, actually. Because the way they're dressed is chaste, and it sends a message to a man that I'm a chaste woman and don't think of me any other way. You know what I mean? But if a woman is dressed in a very sexually provocative way, which she may innocently dress this way because that's just normal, the men don't take it that way. They take it like she's open for business, so to speak. Like, why are you exposing yourself? Just like, for example, I was just in Bologna in Italy, and we did 2 evening programs, and I was just there 2 months previously. And when we leave the program every evening, it's like 10:30 or 11 actually, it's 11 o'clock at night, there's always this same prostitute, a Russian prostitute on the corner. And I remembered her from 2 months ago because it's a memorable sight, because it's not, at least for me, I don't commonly see prostitutes. I've probably only seen a handful my whole life. So everybody said, yeah. I looked at her and I looked at him and he goes, yeah, it's a prostitute. And I go, okay. So, how do you think prostitutes dress? Well, she had a miniskirt, and it was late at night. I couldn't really notice anything else, but she had a miniskirt which was very short. So why does she dress that way? To provoke men. So when women dress this way, it provokes men, and consciously or unconsciously, even though women may not want to send this signal to the world, it provokes a stimulus in a man which makes him think about sex, and particularly sex with that woman. So, as a devotee, obviously, you don't want your presence to invoke thoughts of sex in a man. You want your presence to invoke thoughts of Krishna, right? Just as a man doesn't want to disturb women, Krishna conscious man, he wants, if there's any interaction, he would like whatever interaction there be to be very pure and in no way disturb a woman, no way disturb her service or meditation on Krishna. Similarly, a woman also. But the difference is that men are physiologically, biologically wired to be sexually stimulated by sight, by what they see. So they don't, like you know that story when Rukmini appeared, and I don't know if you know this story, but Rukmini was so beautiful, and her father wanted to marry her, and when princes saw her, it's said that many of them, or all of them, actually fell off their horses by seeing her beauty. Basically, they must have fainted. She must have been so beautiful. And so, men are sexually wired that they're stimulated visually without even touching. They can be completely sexually stimulated just by seeing the beauty of a woman and seeing certain bodily parts of the women, either seeing them in the flesh or seeing them because the women are wearing very tight clothes. So, when women wear very tight clothes, men can see the physical form of a woman as opposed to when women wear saris or more loose-fitting clothes, right? Now, I know personally, because I have a daughter and a wife, that many, many chaste women dress in a way that they don't realize may be provoking men in some way. It's just not even in their thinking. But as women, you have to be conscious of this, because this is how men are stimulated. And I know some of you may think, well, I'm not that attractive, so it doesn't matter how I dress because no man would be attracted to me. And Krishna created the female form to be so attractive that men will even be attractive to you even if you don't think you're attractive. I can guarantee you that. I mean, the only case would be is if you were extremely old, like, you're getting 70s plus, which none of you are, extremely overweight, which most women are not and none of you are, or just have some deformity, some obvious deformity that if men look at you, they would just kind of be appalled, which none of you have, which most women don't. So you need to be conscious of that men are very easily sexually stimulated. When I say sexually, I mean physically, not just mentally attracted. Whereas your attraction will be more mental. I like that man because he's smart, or I like that man because he's gentle. Or it's not that men don't feel that way about women. I like her because she's gentle, she's shy, she's intelligent, she's creative. They do. But what dominates much of that attraction, at least initially, before they know her, is the physical. So if she's overly made up, overly dressed, it's hard for many men to just ignore that. And the interesting thing about Vedic culture is that, and I'm just saying things right now. You can ask questions, we can discuss. I'm not making judgments. I'm just kind of, let's trying to objectify things a little bit. That in Vedic culture, as you know, women got married very young. And why did they get married young? So they didn't have to advertise themselves as older women. Here I am, and then dress themselves up and so forth and try to attract men. And often when you do that, you attract the wrong men. The men who are attracted solely by the physical, they're the wrong men. And you should be need to be aware of that. If that, especially if you're a very attractive woman, you have to be really aware of that, because you can attract the wrong men very easily. So traditionally, they were married very young, so they didn't have to play the field, so to speak, to find a husband. They didn't have to show their stuff, so to speak, to try to attract him, as young women do now. And as you know, the way women dress now, it's almost like they're not dressed. T-shirts are extremely tight, pants are, trousers are tight, or they wear those stretch pants, which is, in many ways, and then what to speak of how they dress at the beach. So it's become part of the culture, that men are so used to seeing beautiful women on the covers of magazines that they expect to see that. And women have to be very thin, and, they have to have everything in the right place, because that's what the men are seeing on the magazine. And the women are seeing that on the magazine, so they're going to the gym and going on the diets to look like that. And now the men are expecting that. And so love and relationships become very much about physical appearance. And that our culture is very sexually oriented. So that's why all those clothes are like that, because that's where our culture has become. But in traditional cultures, when women went out, they didn't dress up. They dressed down. They dressed up at home, which for us it doesn't make sense. It's kind of backwards. Why would you dress up at home? You dress up when you go out. Well, the reason is that they didn't dress up because they didn't want to draw attention to their physical bodies from other men. But their physical beauty was meant for their husband. So when they were at home, they would dress up for him. And they would go out and dress down for everybody else so they wouldn't draw attention to themselves. And I know that's kind of hard to accept, and I know for many women, dressing up and going out, as I said, is a thing where they just feel good about themselves. So I'm just throwing that idea out so you understand that in traditional cultures, in public, women didn't show off their stuff. They covered their stuff so that other men would not be looking at their stuff. And now it's switched around pretty much, where they're showing their stuff, and whether they're conscious of it or not, or how conscious they are, or what they're trying to do to allure or attract other men, and if they, how it makes them feel to attract other men, is another issue. And I think there's all degrees of, I think there's many women who dress like that, who just think it's normal, and they think they look good, and they're not really trying to bother any men. Anyway, for us as devotees, and for women, we want to be sensitive to how we dress. And we can't think, well, I like dressing in a certain way. That's just how I do it. It makes me feel good. And we can't think, and if the men are attracted, that's their problem. It's their weakness, and they just need to get over it, because I'm not lusting after them. I'm not sending out a lusty vibration. This is just how I dress. But we have to understand what it means to dress in a chaste way. And you have to understand the message you will send out based on how you dress. And for a man, you may not be sending out the message, but your dress sends out a message to him. And you may not even know it, because the way you're dressing is the way all the other women dress. It's just normal. And doesn't, you're just not aware that would be in any way upsetting or disturbing. So the point is that we, as women, as devotees, we need to be aware of that, especially when we're going to temples. And especially when we're around unmarried men, whether or not you're married. It's a little less of a problem when you're around married men, but still, general principles apply. So, if you understand, I was just talking for 2 days straight. We had 2 seminars. I think some of my voices disappeared somewhere. So, I don't know if you're all in a state of shock now, or you all understand this. When the world, as we know, is designed in such a way that this male-female energy is magnetic. It's very, very attractive. And what we're seeing in modern society today is that it's kind of out of control. And the increase in divorce is partially due, or primarily due, to the fact that people are making choices of marriage based on physical attraction. And if a man, I don't know for a woman if this is always true, I know it's true in some cases, maybe not to the degree, always to the degree that is true for men, that for men sometimes it's impossible to distinguish love from physical attraction. If the physical attraction is there, he defines it as love, when actually it's love for sex. But he can't distinguish it because he doesn't understand love beyond that. So if he gets the sexual fulfillment, then he loves, because he loves the sex. I don't know if you understand what I'm saying. It's all one package. And so If a man is very, very physically attracted to a woman, sometimes that signals to him that I love her, when in fact he might not love her at all. When he actually finds out what she's like, he'll find that perhaps they're not similar, or I don't really like this person. But that physical attraction makes him think that he does, because he becomes enamored by the beauty. Now, you might say, well, that happens to women also. It's true, it does. But women are also generally, they're concerned about, will this man be a good father to my children? Will he be a good husband? Can he listen to me? Can he provide? Men don't always think like that. They just think, she's beautiful, I want to marry her. And so, you might think, well, do men really think like that? And do men in ISKCON really think like that? My experience is that, I hate to say this, but it's just true. My experience is that anytime a very, very attractive woman becomes a devotee and moves in the brahmacharya ashram, within a few weeks, there are men who we thought were going to be brahmacharis their whole life, deciding they want to get married to her, and usually more than one. And I have this experience over and over again. And if a woman is very beautiful, she will not have a problem getting married in ISKCON. I know it's a problem because there's so many more women now than there are men. But still, if she's very beautiful, she will have a lot of suitors. Maybe not good ones. My wife is very beautiful, and she had many men that wanted to marry her, but she was so intelligent, she held out for me, which proves that women are intelligent, because she married me, right? Anyway, it's true that many men wanted to marry her because she was attractive. So I've seen it, not just with her, but with many, many men. So sometimes when I see, this is a male perspective again, and I'm just trying to share a male perspective with you because I think it'll help you, and I think some of these things you may know, but some of these things maybe you don't know at all, or you don't know to the degree that I'm explaining them. But if a woman is very, very attractive, and all women want to be attractive, and they want to try to make themselves attractive, but sometimes I think when I see a woman who's very, very attractive, I kind of feel, even if it's just any woman on the street, my first thought is she's in a dangerous position, because she's going to have a lot of men interested in her that are really not interested in her other than interested in her as a sexual partner. And these men will be convinced because of her beauty that they love her. And it's a very dangerous situation. So my advice is, don't believe every man who tells you he loves you. It's always doubt it. You should always doubt it, because what is that love? Like Prabhupada told the story of Liquid Beauty. The man wanted to marry this beautiful princess. And then what she did is she took laxatives and purgatives, and she just vomited. And so she became very sickly. And she actually saved the vomit in the stool. And he came back to get her. And he saw her and he didn't recognize her. He said, "Where's that beautiful princess?" And the lady said, "Which was the princess?" "Oh, I saved the beauty. It's here in the buckets." So she showed him the vomit in the stool. So there's my beauty. So, we think, oh, that story, that's gross. And, what's the moral of the story? But the point is, it's the point I'm making, that often the physical is defined as love, and then when a woman's older, that physical beauty changes. And she's not like she was when she was young. And some men who were overly attracted to that beauty will find another younger woman and become attracted. So that's why I say sometimes when I see a woman is very, very beautiful, I think she has to be careful, because she can easily attract the wrong men. the way you dress sends a message to men. And the way you interact with them sends a message to men. Just like as women, you know when a man is lusty, he sends a vibration and you feel it. And usually it feels, for lack of a better word, yucky. And you don't like it. It doesn't feel healthy. So the difference with men is that lusty vibration, it feels good to them. Because to them it's a sign like, this is an open door. And even as a devotee, some men who are not mature may see it as an open door eventually for sex. So you have to be very, very careful in terms of how you deal and interact with the opposite sex, because it does send messages on a subtle platform. And if there's lust in your heart for a particular person, if there's lust in your heart in general, it can be picked up by a lusty man who then takes it as a signal that your door is open. And then you feel that lust from him, and it can feel kind of disgusting. Now, I'm not saying that every time a man is lusty towards you or has some feeling, excuse me, it's because of you. It's not, but it may be. Anyway, the difference with a male is if a woman is like very, very friendly, very, very open, she may be innocently friendly and open, just seeing him as a brother. But usually for men, it signals something like, oh, she's open. That means the door's open, I can advance. Even if for him it's subtle, it just sends a signal. So in dealings, both with how you dress and how you interact, it shouldn't be unkind, it shouldn't be unnatural, but there has to be a degree of formality to it that sends a message that I have some boundaries around me in my relationships, and I don't cross those boundaries, because as soon as you cross those boundaries, you're sending a message. It's like, I've opened the door, come in. And men get it very quickly, and especially if a woman's attractive. And even if a man is not thinking about those things, if a woman's like that, he may very easily start thinking about it, because that's the way men are wired. So they're very wired, again, to be attracted by physical beauty. And then, so you're asking, well, but as a woman, we like to be beautiful. So be beautiful, but don't be beautiful sexually. That is, I would say, in a sense, it's kind of like violence to men. It's unfair. Because if you do anything in the way you dress or the way you deal with men that is disturbing them sexually, because you're not dressed in a chaste way or you're not dealing with them in a formal way, that's not fair to them, because they don't have a lot of control. And you might say, well, it seems like the men in our movement do. But even if nothing happens, for many of them, they're being disturbed in some way, even though you don't realize it. So if you dress nicely, chastely, and you have a vibration of self-respect, they'll feel that. They'll see it in how you dress, and they'll feel it, and that's your mercy to them. That, if you're motherly, they'll feel that. So that's how you should be towards men. And then Chanakya Pandit said, man and woman alone, the butter and fire example, well, how much fire does it take to melt the butter? It takes a little bit. It doesn't take a lot, but in formal dealings, there's not much fire. We have to do something. I have to ask you a question. We deal with it. We talk, but it's formal. We're not in the same room alone every day for an hour, doing service together, talking. That's different. As soon as the man and woman are together, especially alone, or even in public, but working together, even in a public environment, but consistently, then the butter starts melting. And then what happens, and I've seen this happen often, and So I'm not saying this is the only thing that happens. But what often happens is there's an attraction that develops. It's just the nature of opposite sexes that they attract. And because of that constant association, an attraction develops even if they, how would we say, if they were to choose a partner prior to the time of having that association, they may not have chose one another. They may look at the other person and say, no, that's not my kind of man. That's not my kind of woman. That's not what I'm looking for in a husband or what I'm looking for in a wife. But due to the butter and fire melting, at that point, an attraction develops, an attachment develops. They become attached to the pleasure they get from being with one another. It's kind of an addiction, because addiction is defined as a high that you get. And so therefore, when you're not getting that high, then the addiction takes over and you need to do something to get it. So when you have this attachment to another person, it gives you a kind of high, and then you want to see them again to fulfill that high. So there's this addiction, codependency, this person makes you happy, they make you feel good, and so on and so forth. No, if you're very compatible and it works out and everyone lives very happily ever after in the end, okay, But still, it's not the ideal way to meet somebody, because that way is dangerous, because most men and women alone consistently become attached, even if they don't have anything that much in common, even if through intelligence and the help of other peers and adults, they wouldn't have gotten married or wouldn't be together. This is how they come together. And this is one major reason that we end up in divorce, because we came together, we spent time together, there was an attraction, physical and other subtle ways attracted. And we weren't really meant for one another. Now, the male sexual desire is very, very strong, as many of you know, but if you don't know, there are books about this and there are jokes about this. And women who are married who are not devotees, they have experience of the male sex desire, that the men, due to their physical constitution when they're young, you could say in a sense, they're always ready to have sex. It's like it's just unfortunately the way they're constituted, that male testosterone energy, right? And some men are better at controlling that than others. Some men, especially devotees, because they're practicing or trying to practice celibacy, and because they have Krishna consciousness, they control it through strong mental power. But on the physical level, it's oftentimes as strong as it is for non-devotees. Of course, if you control your mind and you have pure thoughts, it will affect you materially, so it calms your mind also. But the understanding is that, at least what you should know, you might say, well, I must be exaggerating. Okay, it's not entirely true to the degree that I'm saying it. Are they really ready to have sex anytime, day or night? Yes and no. I'm using that as a general, but I think I'm safe to say generally, if men had an opportunity for sex, day, night, anytime with an attractive woman, and they had no principles, in other words, according to them, that would be fine. Yes, they would do it. Now, according to their spiritual advancement, their moral standards, if they're married, the stakes involved in they will control it. But on the pure physical level, yeah, they would. So that might be a shock to you, ladies. And you might find it strange that, well, there's so many men who are controlled, because their minds are diverted to other things, because they're good men, because they respect women. Now, in our modern culture, you know well that women are portrayed as sex objects. So let's put two and two together. You're a young man, you grow up in this culture at the mall. Every mall you go to has Victoria's Secret. Every ad has a a half-naked woman on it. The girls that go to, if you go to a school and they don't wear uniforms, then your girls are just the girls you're in your class are dressed tight, and your friends are having sex as soon as they hit puberty and telling you should have it, and if you don't, you're missing out. So this unfortunate reality is that a young boy is gleaned from a very early age to see women as objects of sex. That's what they're good for. That's what, especially if you're a young man, you're not thinking about marriage. So, and your friends are saying, did you have sex with her Saturday night? I would like to have sex with her. That's what young boys talk about in this culture, who they had sex with and who they'd like to have sex with. Because that's how they've been bred by the culture. And the peer pressure is just a reflection of the culture, it's a reflection of the music, it's a reflection of the movies, it's a reflection of the magazines. So our whole culture is just saturated with sex. You're all aware of it. But I'm trying to express it from the male perspective. So now from the male perspective, he's got this deeply ingrained conditioning or attitude, or you could even say analogy, that woman is an object of sex. Whereas Chanakya Pandit says, see every woman as mother, which couldn't be any further from a sexual connotation of woman. It's totally about respect. And it's totally about affection coming from a woman and respect and honor, whereas the other one is sexual object. And so that whole industry of making women look beautiful, photoshopping them on the covers, and the whole cosmetic industry and weight loss industry, it's making it really hard for men, because it's feeding into the very conditioning that they've been raised with, that women are supposed to be beautiful and I'm supposed to enjoy beautiful women. So that's what these poor guys are dealing with. And I say poor guys, and I think if you ask them, they would probably tell you the same thing. Yeah, I'm a poor guy because I was raised in this culture, and it's very difficult now. I want to be a devotee, either as a grihasta or as a brahmachari. So when in our temples and in our society we have some separation, depending on the temple and the country, the separation will vary depending on the number of grihastas, brahmacharis. But we definitely have separation and formality in dealing with male and female. The women at least should understand that these poor guys, whether they're brahmacharis or grihastas, well, the brahmacharis are really the poor guys because they're embarking on a process of celibacy, which basically is impossible for them. But anyway, they're trying to do it. And, let me say, is impossible for most of them, depending on where they're born, what culture. For Indians, it's easier. For Westerners, it's harder. But while they're doing it, I'm not saying they're not doing it, but I'm saying even while they're doing it, it's virtually impossible for them to maintain it because of the way they were trained. But what helps them, what makes it easy, is that the women they associate with an ISKCON are their fires are very low, so they're not hot enough to melt their butter. So I guess there is some truth about calling a woman hot. She's really hot, yeah, because she melts your butter. So women don't try to be hot. They try to be cool because they respect these men who are trying to be celibate. And they don't try to say, well, if I just could get close to him in arti, maybe he'd start looking at me and be attracted. And then, because I'd really like to marry him. You're not supposed to think like that. Or maybe we could get the same service and, then he would get to know me and then he'd be attracted to me. Now, I understand that some women may think that way, and I understand why they would think that way, because in ISKCON it's so hard to meet men, and there's so few that you could meet in the first place. So it's not a very good system, that's for sure. But still, it's not the actual chaste way for a woman to deal with a man, to think, well, maybe, if I spend enough time on this project and he's working on the project, then he'll get to see me and he'll become attractive, and I'll put my best foot forward and this and that. It's not the best way to deal with men. And ultimately, most men would not like that, and they would feel it, and they wouldn't be attracted to it. But as women, I just want you to be aware of how men are wired. And you might say, is this really true? I don't believe it. And you believe it, it's true. To various degrees, for different men. If it's true, then you say, well, why did Krishna wire them that way? Because sexuality was meant to be used for having children in marriage. That was the system Krishna created. That's why women got married young. That's why men got married young. In our society, we believe sex is for enjoyment. It's not that sex is not enjoyable, but Krishna didn't create sex as a recreational sport. He created sex for procreation. And if sex were not enjoyable, there would be no children on the planet, believe me. Why would you do that? If there was no pleasure in it, you would think, I'm not going to do that. That's abominable, which is how a liberated soul thinks. Anyway, so you understand, if their food didn't taste good, nobody would eat. We'd all die. If procreation wasn't pleasurable, living entities would vanish. There'd be no life forms. So we understand sex within the context. It's within marriage. That's where it's used. And outside of marriage, it's not. And within marriage, it's only used with one's wife or husband. That's just how Krishna created it. Now, our society, it's so different that to get that into people's heads is difficult because it's not how we were raised. We were raised boyfriend, girlfriend, sex is fun, you do it with anybody. So now we have to respect a different culture. We're in a culture where we see sex within a specific context and only within that context and not outside of that context. It has no place outside of that context because it creates unlimited problems and it's not the way Krishna created it and it's not natural. So we have to reprogram ourselves because what we thought was natural is not natural. So now we're going from this culture of intermingling of men and women, very little, if any, separation, men and women working together in the workforce and so on. Do you know how many marriages break up because spouses cheat? It's about 50% of the men cheat on their wives. At least that's what's reported. And that's reported for marriages, not for people who are living together. So it's higher than 50% if you add people who are not legally married but live together. And for women, it's 25%. And a lot of this is caused because of intimate association or connection between men and women at the workforce, in the workplace. So they made a name for them, spousal, workplace spouses or something. Workplace, spousal, yeah, that's your spouse at work. And I read a book about marriage, and the author rightly said that if you have any relationship with the opposite sex that is on an emotional level, where in other words you're talking about your problems, you're listening to their problems, you're feeling a connection for the opposite sex in terms of compassion, affection, you want to go out of your way to be kind to them because you like them, you're going out to lunch with them, you're connecting, especially one-on-one. He said what that does is that all that kindness, compassion, affection, and emotion that you gave to that person has been drained out of you, and you have that much less to give to your wife. And I thought it was a very good point. And it's something to think about. So if you're married, all your emotional energy needs to go to your spouse. You don't want to give it to a spouse, a workplace spouse, or any other spouse. You only have one. That's what's going on in the world today. Because in the workplace, they don't have this concept of separation of men and women. So they're all mingling. And you might say, well, what about temples where they mingle? There's small temples and, they have a very good family atmosphere. Yeah, that's fine. It's just there's certain boundaries that we have to follow. It's not that we don't talk to men, we don't talk to women, we spit when we see them. No, we're not talking about that. But we're talking about boundaries, so we have to create boundaries. Like I said, one boundary is you're not alone with another man or woman, and specifically not daily alone in a service. That becomes a problem. And some of you probably have already run into that problem where you became attached to some member of the opposite sex, or they became attached to you because you were too closely involved with one another, right? Then you start sharing your feelings. You should know, if you're not married and you're sharing your feelings with another man or woman, that's going to develop into something. If you are married, you're sharing your feelings. I mean, share one point, talk, get some advice, that's different. But when it becomes a regular thing, yeah, it's going to develop into something. So we want to marry somebody who's chaste, right? We don't want to marry someone who's got, we don't want to marry a guy who's got all these girlfriends and he's still really close with his ex-girlfriend because he still loves her. And it doesn't work. He's really close with his secretary, they travel together, and it doesn't work. Men are like butter and women are like fire. There's this preacher called Billy Graham. He's probably the most successful, the biggest preacher, at least in his tradition. He does these huge programs in football stadiums, huge conversions. And before he began his crusade, or whatever it's called, I think it may be called a crusade, he made a vow to himself. And he said, I will never be alone with a woman. He made this vow. He didn't read it in the Bhagavatam. And they asked him why. He said, because I saw that this was the downfall of many Christian preachers. Sex. So if you're not alone with a woman, you can't have sex. At least I don't know how you could. I mean, you could. At least you can't have sex with a woman. You could imagine you're having it, but you can't actually do it. So the likelihood of imagining it will be extremely reduced if you're not alone with her. So he saw that. That was, God gave him that intelligence. So, you have to look at situations which are not healthy, or which are potentially unhealthy, and just be careful that you don't transgress. Okay, so we've gone about an hour, and we're going to start our next class. But if you have any questions or comments, or I always tell my disciples, well, I don't know if I always tell them, but I mentioned this, and this is awkward, I think, for them. It's not really awkward for me, but I think they think it's awkward for me, and I think they feel it's awkward for them. If ever I say anything that hits you in the wrong way, or that you doubt, or maybe you think is wrong, or even offends you or your sensibilities, tell me, because I need to know. Because in a relationship, if something is not right, then we need to clear it up. And I don't know if I said anything that you would feel that way about, but sometimes I don't know if I did. And maybe I said things that you haven't heard or you don't understand. And sometimes we can clear things up just by explaining what's meant. So if you have anything to ask, any question about this, then please ask. Because I want to make sure you understand, or maybe you all already understood this. Maybe you think, wow, yeah, this was just common sense. I knew all this. And if you already knew it, good. Now you doubly know it. And if you didn't know all of it, now you know some things you didn't know. And if you didn't know any of it, well, it's very good that you listened to it. You've heard from a man what it's like to be a man, and what it's like to be a poor brahmachari trying to be celibate after 20 years of indoctrination of women as objects of sense gratification. It's not easy. So, ladies, feel sorry for those poor guys. Krishna created them with big challenges. You think you have challenges? Well, they have their own challenges which are as difficult. Not emotional, they're more gross physical. So, protect those guys, even if you think they're strong, even if you think you're not a movie star. Why would they be attracted to you? Still, be cautious, be aware. Okay? So we'll end class here. Then we're going to start our next class. And the class is on the topic of love. And we're reading from some quotes of Bhaktivinoda Thakur who was talking about love. And then we're going to discuss that. Is that okay? I guess you have no questions. Or I might be delayed by 60 seconds before you actually get what I'm saying. But in any case, we'll start the next class, okay? So I'm going to go off, and we'll end this class, and then we'll start the next class. So if you want to stay, you're welcome, and we'll see you in a moment, okay? Hare Krishna, Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai.